My name is Marissa. I am so excited to be with you today. Today, I'm going to be talking about mindfulness as a way to access self care for your fellowship year. But before we start, I just wanted to do a quick exercise that will help us be present, bring us to the room right now. So, I want you to just think about and say to yourself, wherever you are, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. So just take a moment to do that. Okay, great. So now that we're all sort of present in the room for this presentation, I want to start by just giving us an overview of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So first I'm going to be defining mindfulness. Then I am going to help you work on building more self-awareness around your emotions because that's really what mindfulness is all about, and I'll go into that in just a bit. And I'm also going to help you understand what a healthy relationship with your emotions look like. So if you feel like maybe your reaction to your emotions isn't necessarily healthy, I'm going to give you the pathway forward. And then we are also going to be doing a lot of fun activities throughout this presentation that helps you apply mindfulness to harmonize with your emotions. So first, let me start by defining mindfulness. Stress really comes from wanting to be in a different place than you are right now. And so what mindfulness does is it helps us bring ourselves back to the moment. So we're just sort of looking at, being present with whatever is happening in our bodies, whatever emotion we're experiencing, we're able to label it. We're not trying to avoid it, to run away from it, or even to wallow in it. It's sort of just a way of accepting your present experience. And counterintuitively, when we don't avoid, when we're able to accept our emotions as they go away more quickly. So that's why one of the reasons why mindfulness is really the key to managing some difficult emotions that we might have. And so I kind of just wanted to start by just going into a little bit of discussion. So I'll give you a chance to go into breakout rooms and ask you, how do you usually relate to your emotions? When you experience, let's say, sadness, anger, do you usually avoid? Do you usually try to feel them? Do you usually suppress them? Are you usually sort of ruminating on them, wallowing on them? Are you usually good at accepting them? Then I want you to talk about in your discussion groups what emotion feels most uncomfortable for you and what emotion feels most comfortable. So when I did this activity, it was just so illuminating for me. I realized that the emotion that is most uncomfortable for me is a sense of helplessness. And I think that definitely comes from my mom, my Haitian background. There's this idea in Haitian culture, it's this term called dégager, which is make do. And so you're always able to sort of make do with whatever situation. It's really, as a Haitian, it's hard to find yourself in a place of helplessness. And I realized that that really affected how I went about things, that I wasn't able to sort of accept or sit with things as they are whenever it made me feel helpless and powerless. And I always was trying to move and be busy and be productive or have the sense of urgency around things that really came from my fear of the sense of helplessness. And so I think understanding when emotions come easy to us and don't come easy to us can also help us understand how our difficulties with some emotions may be affecting how we're behaving and acting in our lives. So that's where that question comes from. And then going into that, this last question, what do you do to avoid feeling the uncomfortable emotion? So I'll let you just talk about that in your groups for a moment. So now that you've talked about that, I wanted to share some ways that people commonly relate to their emotions and talk about how those might be affecting you. So one way that we might relate to our emotions is by doing something called blocking, which is when you kind of deny, you suppress, you numb, you might turn to food, alcohol, things like that. You try to distract yourself. Maybe it's an addiction to being busy. It's really not facing your emotions head on, but instead finding ways to run away from them. And the reason that this is ineffective is really because the purpose of our emotions is to be felt. We have to feel it to heal it, as a psychologist like to say. And so the more that you're distracting, the more that you're avoiding your emotions, the more that they are actually going to likely stay with you. And so then we have the opposite idea of blocking, which is drowning in our emotions. And that's when we sort of just wallow deeply in our emotions. We might make a catastrophe out of something small. This is help. This is awful. I can't handle this. I feel so overwhelmed. What if it gets worse? We might think about all of the worst case scenarios. We might criticize ourselves. And so this is a way of kind of taking our emotional experience and artificially amplifying it in the ways that we relate to our emotions, making them more intense than they would otherwise be, wallowing, ruminating, doing these things that make our emotions cut at us or hurt us more than they otherwise would. And so those are two ways of relating to our emotions that might really be hurting us. And I think, just wanted to mention, like, as a Black woman, there's this idea of the sort of strong Black woman. And that's the idea that, you have to be strong all the time. You can't show sensitivity. You can't show your sort of softer side. And because of that, I think as a Black woman, I'll just say there's a lot of pressure to suppress emotions that come up, to not admit to vulnerability, to not admit to sadness, because that might challenge the idea of being strong. And for me, I've had to go through a deep process of unlearning that, because I realized that actually isn't healthy for me emotionally, even though that was something that was sort of culturally resonant with me. So I also encourage you to also think about your own culture and what emotions feel okay or not okay to feel within the context of your own culture, and how that might affect how you're relating to emotions. So I'll give you a moment to take those questions and discuss them with your group. So this is sort of the last way I'm going to talk about relating to our emotions. And this is the mindful way to relate to our emotions, the way that we can relate to our emotions so that they are the most healthy way to relate to our emotions, so that they don't overwhelm us. And it's really the idea of turning towards. When an emotion arises, we are curious about it. We are willing to accept it. We maybe label our emotions, which has been found to decrease the activation of the amygdala in our brains. The amygdala is active when we're feeling negatively. Just labeling your emotions helped. And we're able to sort of sit with it, like, oh, I notice I feel sad right now. Where does that feel like in my body? Where do I feel that? And this has been found to be one of the healthiest ways to relate to your emotions. So I'm just going to pause here before